But Brandon, we are now going to end the podcast with our preview of the team that made the college football playoff last year, and that is the Ohio State Buckeyes. And Buckeye fans, welcome in if you're watching us on YouTube. And Brandon, I want to get right into it. And actually, the thing with this one that I want to look at is not the college football playoff chances, because I feel like they are fairly high for this team, and there are going to be a lot of people expecting them to make the college football playoff for a third year in a row. Won it 2 years ago, was in it last year, lost to Clemson, or 3 years ago, pardon me. So they have been in it ever since we've had the college football playoff. And this is a team, though, the big thing I look at is the guy who was calling the plays, and Tim Beck, he's at Texas. He followed Tom Herman to Texas, a former Ohio State guy. Now your signal caller is former Indiana head coach Kevin Wilson. I want to ask you this. How do you think Kevin Wilson will do as the offensive coordinator for Ohio State? Do you see this kind of as a pseudo, well, you know what? Lane Kiffin didn't work as a head coach, but as a offensive coordinator for Alabama under a solid head coach in Nick Saban, things work out. Could Ohio State fans kind of look at the same thing? Kevin Wilson got forced out of Indiana for differences in opinions on things, but underneath a solid head coach in Urban Meyer, could be a good offensive coordinator for us.
Yeah, I don't think there's going to be any problem. I think that Kevin Wilson will be just fine. He's staying in the same conference. He's staying in the same side of the conference. I don't think there's going to be any issue. You get to work with an experienced quarterback in J.T. Barrett. You get to work with a team that's very strong. You get to work with an offensive line that's possibly one of the best in the Big Ten, if not the best. You're going to be fine. You're going to be just fine. I don't think there's going to be any problems with him. You got some newer, younger receivers, I think, to be able to develop along. But with having J.T. Barrett, I think you're fine. You're fine, and you're not going to have too many problems.
Here's the question I have with J.T. Barrett, and I'm glad you brought him up. This is a guy over the years, it seemed like, because the first year I'm thinking, well, it was mainly Braxton Miller was the guy. Then they moved Braxton Miller to kind of that offensive weapon. And really when it came down to Barrett or Jones, there was one point, I can't remember if it was last season or the season before, where it was basically, hey, you know what? This guy should be the starter. And then he got the job taken away from Cardell Jones. I want to say it was the year they won the national title with Zeke. Do we see J.T. Barrett finally, to me, take that next step to where you look at this team, and we don't ask the question of, are they a college football playoff team, but do we go back to the question of, is this team going to be a national championship team? Can he be that guy, kind of like how Cardell Jones was that guy? Well, of course he had Zeke. Zeke had an amazing performance in the two games to win against Alabama and Oregon that year. But can he be the guy to not just make this team a college football playoff team, but like we did last year, but really take that next step like we expect him to catapult this team into, they're a national championship contender?
Well, here's the thing that I think is that, you know, it's not going to be just J.T. Barrett. It's not going to be just him. And I'll be honest with you, I don't think that there were too many people that looked when Cardell Jones was there and thought, oh, yeah, Cardell Jones, he's going to lead him. He's going to lead him to a national championship. How many people do you think really thought that?
Towards the end of the year? Like, by the time we got to that college football playoff side, especially after they beat Alabama, I mean, I was rooting for Oregon at that time, but that was a team that really
You're talking about, I'm talking about the wrong period.
When he took the job from J.T. Barrett,
yes.
No one. That team was, to me, I looked at it, was like, we're seeing dysfunctional at the quarterback position, to where we can't decide who's our starter. Which one are we going to go with? Option A, option B? Are we going to mix them? That's what I was looking at.
And that's why I wanted to bring that up, is because right now there is none of that. J.T. Barrett is the guy. He's got the reins. He's riding the horse. He's the only one riding the horse. Boom. And I think that because of that, that gives him the utmost confidence to go out and to just play and play as best as he possibly can and try and get as much as he can out of his offense, out of his wide receivers, out of his running backs. This guy is going to be good. But I think is going to be good this year. We already know he's good, but he's going to be good this year. And I think that the game that I'm interested the most in is the game against Oklahoma. You played Oklahoma last year, and let's be honest about it. Thank goodness for that win, because it got you into the playoff. How do they play against Oklahoma this year? Because Baker Mayfield's still there at Oklahoma. He's still good. They beat Oklahoma pretty good last year.
Here's the thing.
But this year, is that game going to be the same? Is it going to be different? Is it going to matter as much this year as it did last year?
I don't know how I feel yet about Oklahoma, and it's mainly because of two things. It's mainly option A is because before last season, we didn't see the off-the-field instances that we've seen with Baker Mayfield now, where he's been getting in trouble a little bit off the field, where we had that, he got stopped by the cops for being intoxicated, which everyone's going to go, well, he's a stupid college kid. Of course, you're going to be intoxicated. But then that idiotic film of him being like, where you can see him kind of like thinking slowly, like, I'm a pro football player. I can outrun them. And then he tries to outrun him and he gets tackled into a kind of cement wall. We see that this year of off the field issues with Baker Mayfield, who's your starting quarterback. And B, I don't know yet how to gauge the coaching change. Yeah, it's a similar situation where we talked about with Indiana, where they're just promoting a guy from within and someone who's capable of taking the job. But without Stoops there, is it going to be a different game? And especially the game back and forth we're going to get between now the coaches, now that it's not Mark Stoops against Urban Meyer. Those are the two things I look at with Stoops. Bob Stoops. I'm thinking of his brother at Kentucky. Thank you. Bob Stoops, where it's those two things are now, what am I how am I gauging Oklahoma? I'm still kind of iffy when it comes to them. However, I'm still expecting that to be a solid game. I just don't know if it's going to be as close as I once thought. But this Ohio State team, like you bring up the schedule, the only thing that Indiana could be tough, because although I said I expect them to beat Indiana, if they come out and surprise, that could be something, because that will be at Indiana. However, good thing for them, they get most of their backloaded games, Michigan State, Michigan, and Penn State after October. Last week of October is Penn State, and then the rest, the two Michigan teams, are in November. So they get them all backloaded at the back of the schedule.
They have Ohio State, if they lose any of their first 6-7 games,
they don't deserve to be in the college football playoff.
They're in big trouble.
Mm-hmm.
They're in big trouble. Not counting necessarily that Oklahoma game.
Mm-hmm.
That Oklahoma, I think, we haven't obviously looked at them, but just knowing that Baker Mayfield is back for all the on-field stuff that he can do, you have to put them in the top of the, towards the top of that category in the Big 12. But everything else, Indiana, Army, UNLV, Rutgers, Maryland, Nebraska, if I'm Ohio State, I should be beating every single one of them. You should be. And then you get to Penn State. Later,
that's going to be the big one.
It's late in the season. It's late enough in the season where you lose that one, and then you've got Michigan State and Michigan after that. And 2 losses can still get you a spot.
Mm-hmm.
But
it's going to be hard.
That'd be tough.
You know how I said Penn State's season comes down to one game? Remember when I said, Ohio State, Penn State, that's what their season comes down to? Yeah, for Ohio State, it's a little different. They've got 2. And the reason why they've got 2 is because that team in Michigan that I talked about with Penn State, Michigan's not going to play up to play. Like, they're not going to have, how do I want to put this? The extra juice in the chamber when they play Penn State compared to when they play Ohio State because of the significance of that Michigan-Ohio State game. Those two teams could walk in 0 wins, and they would play like they're undefeated, college football playoff on the line between Michigan and Ohio State. So that's the one thing that you think, okay, that's a knock against Ohio State compared to Penn State for making the college football playoff. They've got 2 tough games just based on that rivalry game, and it's at Ann Arbor. I kind of feel this Ohio State team, pardon me, I kind of see them going undefeated this year. And it's going to be, of course, that Penn State game could be the only one they lose. I don't see them losing to Michigan this year. I don't see that happening because of what we talked about with Michigan and because of everything with Ohio State. They're going to be, at that point, the way I'm looking at it in my mind, and of course my mind ain't 100% correct, but what I'm seeing right now is if they win that Penn State game and they keep winning, they're just going to be carrying momentum to where they will win that Michigan game and then go on into the postseason and kind of leave it where they may in the Big Ten title game. And at that point, if they go undefeated, the college football playoff.
I've got to ask you this. I just got to come out and ask you this question. Why the fuck are you so high on this team? Why do you think
the defense
that they can be this undefeated team that doesn't probably even deserve to be in the college football playoff because of how awful they looked last year?
It's the defense. And the main part I'm looking at on this defense is their front seven, mainly their line. That defensive line is going to be ferocious for that team, and they are going to get after quarterbacks to where I feel like the Penn State, because let's be honest, the 2 games I'm looking at is I'm comparing them to Penn State and I'm comparing them to Michigan. And I feel like in my head for Michigan, I feel like that defense is going to cause some moderate havoc for Wilton Spate. And because that Michigan defense is not going to be what it was near last season, I feel like this Ohio State offense is basically going to, at that point of the season, be able to mesh together to get the job done, get the win there. And then we have a similar situation when it comes to the Penn State. The main difference is the offense for Penn State is so much, I don't want to say better, but highly ranked. They have more studs on that offense than Michigan does. And I feel like that game, and the reason why I gave it that question mark was I feel like it is going to be Ohio State is going to be able to offensively do enough to say we can win the game. But that game is going to come down to the side of the football where it is basically the Penn State offense, the Ohio State defense, going head-to-head. Whichever one wins that side of the field wins the game. Whichever one wins. If Ohio State can make their life hell and force them into situations and keep them off the board, their offense is going to be able to do enough to win that game. But if that defense can't, that Penn State offense will score points and will do enough to outscore the offense of Ohio State.
So here's where I find the defense of Ohio State to possibly have an issue is there were teams towards the end of the year last year that were able to run a lot against this defense. And if they don't clear that up, they could find themselves in a really, really tough position. And, Clemson in the college football playoff was able to run wild all over them, over 200 yards. And Michigan State, who lost by a point, had over 200 rushing yards. And Wisconsin did a great job of playing them very, very physically. And the Ohio State won that game, but gave up plenty of yards in the process. That is something where I look and I think Ohio State, they have a good defense. They are very, very similar, I think, in the sense of Michigan, is that they lost a lot of guys to the NFL. They're quickly trying to restock these guys in these positions. These guys they lost who are really good, bring up these guys who are supposed to be really good and, have the potential to be very good. But there's not as much of a question mark with a team like a Penn State.
Well, and the thing is, and the one thing is, I do feel like if there's any question mark with Penn State, it's that defense with the things that they lost to where, like I said in that one, it's the offense to me that I think is going to have to carry them this season. The thing that's going to be Ohio State's strongest defensively is that defensive line. When you're talking about the running, it's going to be, to me, the big question. I think Wombly is the one that's going to move over from outside to inside to one of the guys that went to the NFL and Raekwon McMillan. He's not there anymore. So to me, I feel like the linebackers are going to be the core where Greg Schiano is going to look at them and, hey, we got to stop the run. The defense is, the holes will be set up by the offense. It's those linebackers that need to get into those holes and make sure that the running back has nowhere to go, because I feel like this defensive line is just going to be, let's get into the backfield, let's cause havoc, because quarterbacks are going to be, that's where their bread and butter is going to be, is defensive line, penetrating that offensive line, and using the ends to get around and hopefully get after the quarterback. And when it comes to the run, it's having those linebackers there to just fill in the holes. However, it's easier said than done.
You're absolutely right.
It's a lot easier said than done.
You're absolutely right. I think we're in for what's going to be probably a 3-team race at the top of that East Division.
And I'm glad you said 3-team race, because the one thing I teased at the end of the Penn State was, where's my little pie graph? And I gave a little slice, a 30% slice to Penn State to win the Big Ten. That's what we're going to say, win the Big Ten. And I'm going to fill out the rest of my pie. And I'll start with the 20% on that side with Penn State. It's Michigan. So that means if Michigan has 20% of the pie and Penn State has 30% of the pie, how much percent of the pie does Ohio State have?
50.
50% of the pie. I think this team is going to ride. I am going deep. Something for Ricky. Usually I go offense. I am going defense over offense this year. And I think even though, like I said, comes down to that Penn State-Ohio State game, I'm going to go defense over offense this year and ride the team that'll have the stronger defense compared to the team that'll have the stronger offense.
I think you're really giving too much to Ohio State. I think you're giving too much to Ohio State. I think that the percentages are much closer than what you've made them out to be. That's just my
what would you put them if you had to put
opinion.
the three? Just those three for the Big Ten title. We'll do it that simple. Because in this case, we'll say if they win the Big Ten title game, they're in the college football playoff.
I'd say Penn State 40, the other two 30.
So you're riding more of that, like you said, they're closer, but you're giving the edge to Penn State over an Ohio State.
I don't think that there's one of these teams. That's why, when it's almost like, are you kidding me? In my opinion, when you have one so far out in front of the other, is I think because of what Penn State did last year, where Michigan needs to be this year, and what Ohio State is going to continue to do, these three teams, I feel like it's going to be a jumble right up at the it's going to be like the American League Central Division, where you've got teams half a game, 1 game, 2 game, all right there, all very close to the top, and then one of them has to break away a little bit, but it's going to be a close race. That's what I see it as. It's going to be very close, right there at the top. Those three teams.
The wild card will be Michigan. And the reason why I say that is, like I said, I'm going to say it again. To me, when it comes down to Ohio State, Penn State, their matchup is the most important game when it comes to the Big Ten title game. However, if Michigan can be a wild card, beat a Penn State again, beat an Ohio State this year, then that is where things will become interesting. If Michigan sits back, well, not sits back, but if Michigan loses to both the teams, then it just comes down to, okay, who wins that head-to-head matchup? But Michigan, to me, will be the most important team for throwing that chaos into the race for these teams in the Big Ten East, because if they beat one or both of them, then it kind of creates that little the tiebreakers for the let's get into the conference championship game, but also it adds into the discussion for that college football playoff as well. And this is where, before we wrap it up, is there anything that we missed with Ohio State?
I don't think so.
It's where you guys come in. We're going to pull you guys into the conversation. Let us know down below, what do you think of the Ohio State Buckeyes? What do you feel the three teams that we talked about here at the end, Michigan, Penn State, Ohio State, the playoff race? Let us know what you think about these teams heading into this season. It was great to finally, this is my conference. This is the one that I live for, especially being an Illinois fan and watching this conference very closely each and every year as we get into college football. And I believe we're under 50 days now, Brandon. I believe as of today of recording, we're 49 days or so away from college football action, as we are nearing the middle of the July month, and it will be August before we know it, and it'll be pigskin time. But next week we will look at the Big Ten West, look at those teams, and then we'll look at the Pac-12 and the Big 12 and to complete our college football previews. I want to thank you guys for either listening on Blog Talk Radio or watching on YouTube. Thank you guys for giving us your time, either in the morning, the evening, the afternoon, whatever time it is by you. But as always, have a good day, everybody.